This talk is about creating a culture of continuous improvement in a company that doesn't already have one. So maybe some of you can deal with this yourselves. I came from Spotify. I've been in this new company, Avvo, as the CTO for 4 months now. So I'd been at Spotify for 3 years beforehand, running consumer engineering, and then decided to move and went to this new company. And if you know, there's a reason why there's 3.5 Spotify speakers at this conference, because Spotify is very well known, and rightfully so, as a company that does Agile very well, does a lot of things well about product development. The one takeaway I came away with a lot. I learned a lot working there. But the one thing I learned was how amazing it is to work in a company that actually cares about getting better at what it does and spends a lot of time trying to be better than it was the day before every day. I'd worked at Microsoft, I'd worked at Adobe, I'd worked at IBM before I came to Spotify, and I'd never experienced a place where not only did we look at our failures and try and place blame, and also try and figure out what happened, but we actually looked at our successes at Spotify and tried to figure out what did we do well here and how do we do that again, and what did we do wrong here and how do we do that. I had one of the first projects I had at Spotify was when we released, I think it was Led Zeppelin came onto the service, and that was a tremendous success in a lot of ways. And this was not long after I joined the company. Maybe it wasn't Led Zeppelin, maybe it was somebody else, I forget. But one of the first meetings I came to was a retrospective on this project that had been amazing. And any other company I'd worked at, we would have had the cake, we would have had the champagne, and we would have moved on. And instead, I found myself in an afternoon-long meeting, like a 4-hour meeting, talking about everything that went wrong with this amazingly successful project and how we would learn from that. And that made a huge impression on me. So when I came to Avvo, I knew that was the culture I wanted to create there. So I'm going to talk about how I've been working on that over the last 4 months and where we're going. For those of you who are consultants and are kind of coming in and having 6 months to fix everything, maybe I can give you some tips on how to do that. For those of you who are full-time and trying to help your companies grow and get better, maybe there's some things you can learn from my mistakes and the things I've done well or been party to. Let's talk about this company, because Avvo's not in Europe yet, so you don't know anything about it, I'm going to assume the starting point when I showed up in June, my first day in June. This is a little bit about the company, give you context. Company is 10 years old. So it's the same age as Spotify. Okay, so not a 6-month-old startup, not like Nokia, not a 110-year-old or 150-year-old company. The company emerged in the last 10 years. But unlike Spotify, one of the insights the leadership of Spotify had early on was the company's we know in order to be successful, we have to be very big. And a lot of the work, all this stuff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the work around this tribes guilds, all these kinds of things, was figuring out how to grow well and maintain the culture as the company grew, because Spotify grew 50, 80, 100% every year for years. At Avvo, it's not quite the same story. It's maybe a more similar story to what you have in your company, where the company started and it was kind of doing okay, doing all right, it's just growing slowly, but linearly, and then all of a sudden, company hit just product market fit and went boom and started growing amazingly fast. All of a sudden, couldn't keep up with the business, started hiring like crazy. So everybody, a huge portion of the company has come in the last 2-3 years. So what happens in that world, right? You go from having a company that can all sit in the same room together, it becomes a bigger and bigger room, but literally all sat in the same room together. Everyone's within earshot, everyone's within eyeshot, to now we're on 7 floors of a building in downtown Seattle, right? Where I don't sit on the same floors as any of my peers. engineering spread across 3 floors. Things are very different. And it wasn't that long ago. It was only 2-3 years ago that everybody was in the same room. So there was some good stuff. I'm not, I had choices. I knew I was leaving Spotify. I was talking to a lot of companies. I could have gone many places. I wanted to go to a place that I was going to be happy at, right? So Avvo coming in, there were some nice benefits to it. One was that it had very strong values. Values similar to my own. Values actually very similar to Spotify's. These are them. And the company actually lives its values. If you're looking for a job, and I think as Jürgen said yesterday, you have the values that HR has written in, they're posted on the wall. That was certainly the case at Microsoft and Adobe, and nobody's living those values. They're just stuff HR made up. Now these were true values, and the company lived them. And if you didn't act in accordance with these values, not only would your peers kind of call you out, but certainly leadership would as well. So that was important, and these are pretty strong values and very similar. The other thing is that this was a company that had known that it wasn't growing well, and it really wanted to. It wasn't acting. The values were there, the culture was mostly there, but operationally the company was really struggling. And so there was a huge desire to change. When they hired me, that was basic as CTO, right? That was a pretty clear mandate, like, we're gonna change. We wanna do things differently. For some of you, you're gonna come into a company where there's maybe a cool manager that's like, oh, we should be better than we're at. Somebody who gets it, but a lot of the company doesn't care. They're very happy doing things they've always done. They don't want to change. That sucks. And I don't have any tips for you whatsoever. What I can tell you to do is if you have a choice, don't do that. I don't like doing that. Culture change is hard. Culture change is hard when the values are in line with the culture that you're trying to create. Culture change sucks when the values are out of line with the culture that you're trying to create. You have to change the values, and that's painful. Just ask Yahoo. The other thing that was pretty good, again, I'm kind of lazy. I've done agile transformations for years in previous companies. I didn't want to have to do that again because honestly, life's too short, sorry, and it's not my job to teach people agile. That's why I would hire maybe one of you. But the cool part was agile was already established. Not as great as Spotify, not level. Mostly shoe, some ha, but it's there. So it's more about improving than changing. There were lots of challenges. Communication being a real big one. If you were in my dojo the other day, you heard me say this, and this is absolutely true. The first casualty in company growth is going to be communication, right? In this company, because the growth had been so amazingly rapid, again, went from 1 big room to 7 floors, there had been no real thinking about how are we going to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. This is a highly transparent company. It's one of the values, transparency and honesty and openness. But it went from, if the CEO said something, everybody could hear the CEO because he was standing over there, to now the CEO's on floor 14, and anybody who's not within 5 meters of him doesn't hear what he's saying, but he's kind of assuming that information gets out, and there was no way to do it. Communication was horrible. And bad habits had become part of the myth, right? So another thing is if you're in a small company, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, again, you all know each other. You all know each other fairly well. You may have some bad habits, but the good part is those bad habits you can auto-correct, right? They don't really have a lot of impact because you all can see each other, you can talk to each other. When you get big, especially big really fast, those habits and the conditions that created them have become part of the myth, right? It's the 10 monkeys story. And what I found when I would talk to people would be they'd be doing something that was obviously a bad idea. Like, why? And I'd ask, well, why are you doing this? This doesn't really seem like a good idea. And the response was, well, product says we have to do it this way. I'd say, well, let's go talk to product, because that seems really dumb. So go talk to product. Do they need to do this way? No. Why would you do this? That's really silly. Oh, well, product says you don't have to do this. Oh, but it's not product, it's like the chief product officer. I'm like, okay, let's go talk to the chief product officer. Should they be doing this? No, that's crazy. Okay, chief product officer says don't have to do it this way. The product person says you don't have to do this way. Why are we still doing this? Well, it's what we're supposed to do, so we're just going to keep doing it that way. There's this weird myth thing. Maybe you've seen this in your companies. So I get there, and this is kind of some of the things I've heard even before I showed up. But now I'm there, and what am I going to do? I'm going to evaluate and try and understand. When you take a new gig, you always want to get in and fix stuff, prove your value super fast. I'm here, you're paying me and a lot of money, and I'm going to make sure I'm bringing value for that money. That's usually a bad idea, right? Because the first problem you see is maybe not the most important problem. In fact, the first problem you see might actually be a benefit for everybody except the person you're talking to. So I had to spend a little bit of time, met with every team in the company to get a really good, complete picture. And, sorry, I changed my talk around last night, so I have to check and see where I'm at. So the first actual month, several weeks to a month, my calendar looked like this. No slack time in here, Henrik. Because I was meeting with every team in the company, and this is several hundred people company. Because what I wanted to understand was what's going on. But the questions I asked are going to seem pretty similar similar to a lot of questions you probably ask as an Agile person, which is 3 important questions. What's going well? I always started with what's going well, because I didn't want this to be like a tell me everything that's wrong. But what's going well? What's not going well? And then what can I do to help? Now, if you're a senior executive, and what everybody's expecting you to do when you come in is to fire everybody. I'm cleaning house. I'm here. The guy from Spotify is here, and what he's going to do is he's going to fix the company by firing everybody that doesn't want to be autonomous. You're autonomous. You don't want to be autonomous? Get out, right? Especially in America. But that's not what I wanted to do. One, I wanted to start by, I had in my mind, I want to create this culture of continuous improvement. How do I do that? Well, one of the things I do is I establish, I'm here to help. I'm here to help you improve, not I'm here to fix you. So how can I help? And asking that question instead of saying, what should I fix or what should I change as leadership was an important thing to establish the kind of relationship I wanted to have with the company, but also what I was starting to expect from people. That you're going to take responsibility and I'm going to help you get it done. But I had all these conversations, I took tons and tons of notes, then I spent a Slack day and made my backlog, my personal backlog. Here's all the things I needed to do. In my office, I have a whiteboard wall, so the whole wall. I'm not that tall, but I started as high as I could, making my backlog and my prioritization, went down to the floor, then started up again, went down. So you're seeing the tops of this, really, and then had a whole other thing as well. This was all the stuff I kind of needed to fix in the company or needed to help make happen. So it was a pretty big list. But I'm Agile, started pulling the things off the top and seeing what I could help with that. There's a few things I learned, and you may see this in your company, and I'll show the kind of badness that this produces. One was there were so many silos. So many silos. And it was crazy, at Spotify, what you may not hear, I can say because I don't work there anymore. There's some, people often ask me oh, okay, does finance have a guild? Or what do the squads in HR look like? No, they don't have squads. Are you kidding? They're finance. They act like finance. If you worked at Nordia or you worked at Spotify in finance, it's basically the same job. That's what they told me anyway. And we had this, so you expect these kind of big silos between finance and marketing, and we certainly had them. Finance, marketing, development, HR, whatever. But not only that, but we had these full stack teams. I had the problem that within a 8-person team, development and product had a silo between them. They were sitting literally next to each other, and there was, well, product, whatever. And they're like, it's initial, he sits right there, right? And product and UX, same problem, right? I don't know how this had happened, but it was partly due, as I looked into it, it was a lot of just this rapid growth and just how things had worked. There was, one of the things, before I was at Spotify, I was at Adobe, and one of the things I'd done there is try and reduce the bottlenecks between teams, because that just slows teams down. So the back-end dependencies on the infrastructure and the front-end dependencies on the back-end made everything have to take forever because everybody's got to coordinate their backlogs, which sucks and slows everybody down. So at Adobe, I've been kind of breaking the dependencies between teams in my organization. I came to Spotify. Spotify does that automatically. That's part of autonomous teams. Autonomous teams let you get rid of these dependencies by definition. So for some reason, Avvo, having gone from like 8 developers to 90, had somehow managed to create a ridiculous web of dependencies between the teams, which meant that you want to deploy your service, you need like 5 other teams to do something, and it really slowed everybody down. You may have seen that in your companies. I've seen that in a lot of companies now. The cool part was we had this value around transparency, but we didn't have clarity. And what that meant was, if I'm a team and I'm working, one day the CMO stops by. It's pretty cool. CMOs come to talk to our team, and she says, hey, we're doing this big event, and it'd be great if we could make some changes to work for this event. And the team goes, wow, okay, yeah, head of marketing's asking us to do this. Yeah, we'll do this. We'll flip into this for now. Next week, the chief revenue officer comes by and says, hey, the sales team, we're going to do this offer, and it'd be great if you could kind of do this thing for us and get this done pretty quick, kind of like Henrik was just talking about. But this is different because it's like the chief revenue officer, and the team's like, well, yeah, but chief marketing officer asked us to do this other thing. Well, yeah, but she thinks that's important, but no, this is really important. So do this, don't do that. Oh, okay, and context switch and start doing that. And then the next week, the chief product officer comes by and says, hey, what are you doing? No, you shouldn't be doing any of that stuff. You need to be focusing on this. Like, this is what we're supposed to be doing. So now you have 3 different members of the senior leadership team coming by your team and telling you to do different things. And the great part is, you can talk to them. They're very transparent. They'll tell you everything they're thinking, give you all that context. The problem is they're telling you different things, and there's no way to tie break it when it comes from that level, right? You, as a member of a team, there's no way for you to do that. So there's tons of transparency, so little clarity, which is maybe also something you see in your companies. And a bad pattern had developed. And this I've seen in so many companies, but it was very true in Avvo. So what had happened? There's all these questions around, there's such lack of clarity around priorities, had just normal tech debt had been accumulating. You had all these crazy dependencies between teams, which made it really difficult for them to ship. And what started happening? Well, the velocity is slowing down. And the velocity should be speeding up. Like, we went from 5 developers to like 90. Why are we so much slower, right? How many times have you heard this? Like, we hired all these more people and we're just going slower and slower. Like, what's going on? Well, it must be that the developers don't care anymore. When we were small, like, everybody was working all the time and it was really fun. And now we're bigger and everybody's just chilling back and like drinking all day or something. If you're outside of engineering, you have no visibility into what's going on. So you just assume developers are smoking weed or something. It's legal in Seattle, by the way, in Washington. You can't do it at work, but it's legal. Anyway, so what do? You say, well, we need them to, obviously they're not taking accountability for their work. Well, we need to make them take accountability for their work. We're going to force them to take accountability for their work. How do you force them to take accountability for their work? Let's put dates in. Dates, you make the date. It's a challenge, right? It's a constraint. So let's put in these really aggressive dates on all these projects. So that way, the developers will feel like, oh man, we got to hit those dates, and they're going to work really, really hard. And our velocity will increase. But of course, the issues weren't that development were smoking weed. The issues were that like a whole bunch of things had been accumulating, management debt, organizational debt, technical debt that hadn't been paid down. So what happens when you add this forcing function of dates? Developers are doing their best to try and meet these dates, which means that they're starting to cut corners. They're shipping without the right quality effort involved, and they're starting to make things worse instead of better, which means that you just keep slowing down, and then this pattern continues. We're slowing down, we should be speeding up, we're missing all of our dates that we've set. Of course, the dates were meaningless because they were just there to kind of force accountability. So this is kind of the world I joined into. It sounds horrible, but it wasn't, but it kind of was. So now I'm there, I need to start tilling the fields, right? To help create a culture, the culture that I wanted to work in. So first of all, I needed to fix this clarity problem. Let's make those priorities clear. For those of you who know Stephen Covey's 4 Disciplines of Execution, you maybe have heard of this, wildly important goals. One of the first meetings I had with senior leadership after doing this investigation was we need to make priorities clear. Let's set some wildly important goals. So we did, 3 or 4. I would have preferred 3, but baby steps, right? Let's limit the whip. These are strategic, high-level company goals, business-oriented. Takes a long time, 12 to 18 months, really, 6, 12, 18 months. Long enough that they don't change very often. Sorry, lost my slide. Okay. We decide them, so this is senior leadership. We're deciding important strategy for the company. So that gave some clarity to them. The next level in this 4 Disciplines of Execution, pretty important goals. So wildly important goals, WIGs, pretty important goals, pigs. We didn't really like pigs. I certainly didn't like calling things pigs. So we kind of switched up the language just naturally to sub-WIGs, which actually turns into SWIGs, which is, that's a little bit nicer. These are on a shorter time frame. These are tactical goals, right? So I tried to, let's see if we can do them, let's think about 3 to 6 months, but try for 3 months. These are also, by the way, these are limited and prioritized, 1 through 7. I wanted to do 5. I couldn't get everybody to agree there's only 5 priorities, so again, baby steps, we did 7. Obviously, for some reason, 7's not getting done. Well, that's a surprise. As I said, these are on a shorter time frame. We review them on a pretty ongoing basis, maybe every 6 weeks. These shouldn't change that often, but they change once in a while. I should also say, by the way, that partly I learned this also from Spotify. Spotify did this as well. We had a big problem around alignment. This helped. So I stole some of this from Spotify. These are all kind of very large cross-functional efforts. So this isn't, let's switch to using Kafka for messaging. That's something my team would just do as part of paying down technical debt. This is, we're going to execute this thing, and we need finance, software development, and marketing to all work together on this. So by making it a high priority and a clear priority, everybody knows what they should be doing. There's none of this he said, she said kind of thing. The difference between the WIGs, which are set by me and my peers, and the SWIGs is the SWIGs are proposed by the organization. This is starting to try and build a little bit more autonomy into the organization. We say, we have this context, this business context. We're going to set these big, audacious goals for the company, and then you're going to tell us how we're going to do it, which, by the way, was a very new concept and took a lot of training. But the organization says, okay, this is how we think we're going to get there. We work with them to prioritize it. So each one of these has an owner. That owner comes from the organization, not from senior leadership, but one of us in senior leadership mentors with them. We look at this as a way of growing leaders, future leaders within the organization. And each one of these has, most importantly, has a definition of done that says when it comes off the list, when it's complete. And then we have posters like this all over the office, so there's no question. This is what. If you can be working on one of these 7 things, you should be working on one of these 7 things. Total clarity. The next thing, I was getting rid of these arbitrary dates and trying to find a different way to look at how we did our work and how accountability should work. Now, I worked at Microsoft on Windows, and when I worked on Microsoft on Windows doing massive waterfall, industrial waterfall back in the 90s, one thing I'll tell you, we had dates. Well, I knew when we started the next version of Windows when that was going to ship, and I knew to the day. But back then, the way software worked was we'd tape out. We still called it taping out, even though there wasn't tape anymore. It was a hard drive. But that hard drive would then, the golden master, and it would get duplicated and then shipped. Because what Microsoft had to do was it had to get the CD and DVD in manufacturing capability from the entire world. When Windows XP shipped, which I worked on, Microsoft leased every DVD manufacturing plant in the entire world. And if you're gonna do that, you have to do that way in advance. You can't just say, we're gonna take over every plant in the world, we're gonna do that next week. Is that okay? Like, we need you for a solid month, but we'll do it next week. Is that gonna work out okay for you? So you had to do this 2 years in advance. And then there's a lot of money. If we shipped a day late, that meant everything moved out a date, which means that Microsoft had to pay millions and millions of dollars to keep those plants. So this was a lot. If you're younger, you don't remember this world, but this was the world we lived in before like app stores. So then they'd manufacture DVDs for a month, put them in boxes, put those boxes on boats, put those boats, in containers on trains, trains to warehouses, warehouses into trucks, trucks to stores. Then you would drive, because you had to drive, you would drive to the store, buy the box with the DVDs in it that I'd finished like a couple months before, take it home and spend the afternoon installing your software. That was the world. But those dates had meaning, right? It sucked. I can tell you it sucked. But those dates had meaning. The dates that we were picking, the dates that you do a lot of your projects, even the stuff you signed agreements with clients, those dates have no meaning. And everyone knows they have no meaning. They're just dates that were picked. And that sucks to work on, because you're struggling to make this date, and the date really doesn't have a meaning other than some crap to kind of force you to finish work by time. So I wanted this. But the great thing about dates is dates give accountability. You make the date or you don't make the date. Well, how do you have accountability if you don't have that date? Well, you have data and you have metrics. And that's actually much more important, because metrics are what drive the business. Dates don't drive the business, metrics drive the business. So what I had to do was get rid of this cycle of just like, we're gonna set dates on this project. Why are we setting a date on this project? What meaning does the date have? Well, we think we should be done by then. Well, that's dumb. Let's instead have these teams focus on the metrics that move the business, because that's gonna determine whether we as a business are successful or not. And so that's how we had to do that. But in order to do that, it required a lot of other work, which is one, taking these metrics seriously and starting to be a much more data-driven than we had been. We went from saying, are we going to make this date, this arbitrary date, to are we moving the metric? And if we're not moving the metric, are we learning why we're not and how we can do it soon? And changing that was a big culture change. But the great part, if you've been living in this world, you've been beaten down, you're burning out, and this seems like a much better thing. So it wasn't that I had to convince people so much as that I had to actually teach them how to do it well, because they were very happy to change what they were doing before. Part of this, as I said, if you're going to be really data-driven and use data for accountability, you actually have to start using data for your decision-making. And we had been pretty bad about that. We thought we were pretty lean when I showed up, like, oh, we're testing things and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we kind of weren't. It was still very opinionated. Like, I think this is going to be awesome. Why do you think that's going to be awesome? Because it's freaking awesome, man. It's going to be great when we ship this. Okay, like, let's step back and figure out what we need to do. So we created a data-driven decision-making framework. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to go into it, but I can tell you Henrik's written about Spotify Dibs. You should read that. It's actually quite good. I took the Spotify Dibs, merged it with the Toyota A3 to kind of get some of the stuff I didn't think Dibs handled well. And that's kind of what we're doing. Eventually we'll talk about it, but we're still improving it. All of this up to now was just setting the stage, and I'm out of time, but I'm going to go real fast now because I'm almost done. It was really just setting the stage, is plowing the field, is getting ready to plant these seeds. And the next part, this was all just setting it up so that we could move into this culture of continuous improvement. And honestly, this is where we're at today. Everything I've been talking about has already happened, and this is what I'm doing right now. But I needed to do all that work, all that prep work, so that we could actually start doing this. Just changing the way we think about things. So one of the things we've done is we've started doing retrospectives everywhere, which maybe you do. I hadn't seen before, Spotify, this Led Zeppelin thing. We now do that. And that's very easy to do, by the way, in your company if you already have a lot of these other pieces in place. Anytime there's a project, positive or negative, you say, oh, when are we doing the retrospective? Oh, can I sit in on the retrospective? Oh, do you have the notes from the retrospective? And then people go, we haven't done a retrospective yet. Because they're not going to say, like, well, we weren't going to do one because those are stupid. They're just going to say, oh, yeah, we're totally doing that. I was trying to schedule it, and I just haven't, but I'll do it. I'll make sure we schedule it. Just asking that question everywhere, all the time. Oh, wow, that went really well. I can't wait to see the retrospective notes. Just ask for that. The other part is then saying, hey, let's create a place on Confluence, and that's where we put those retrospective notes so everybody can see them. Okay, like, hey, have you done your retrospective yet? I was gonna schedule it. Okay, cool. When I'm gonna look in the Confluence area next week to see these retrospective notes. I'm really looking forward to it because that project went so well. The other part, and I really have to stress this, is doing those things. We did retrospectives on projects that didn't go well, and we called them postmortems, right? And all those postmortems were, hey, what's everything that went wrong with this, and what are we going to do to fix it? And that was it. That was the pure limit of it. And I had to start people thinking, one, we don't do these just to punish you or to figure out who screwed up. We're doing these because we're trying to learn, and so we're going to do them when we do successful projects, and then we're going to store them. So wrapping up with clear priorities, removal of these kind of date-driven artificial cadences, metrics-driven teams, data-driven decision-making, a practice of retrospectives, archive of the learnings from those retrospectives. We have been making a change where we're going from this pretty horrible cycle to this much better cycle of much better data-driven product development, the kind of thing that you're trying to hope to get. And the cool part for us is that not only are we making this much more virtuous cycle happen, and it is happening, these things have had an impact, but we're also improving every stage of these now, which has been pretty amazing for just 4 months of work. So, thank you.